Okay,
Welcome.
so
Hey.
now
No.
we are
Come on.
headed for Steve talking
Come
to
on.
us about Visher maps,
Come
which
on.
I'm not sure I'm
Hey,
saying
everybody.
correctly.
Come on, look at this. It's my girl. My girl.
And James, I think you have a open mic.
Oh,
With the kitty cat.
I
Maybe your
do.
cat's crossing over. Okay, go ahead, Steve. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Tom, you want to go ahead and put the map up? So the map I'm going to talk about today is a map of essentially the New England coast, if you will, mid-Atlantic up through, Boston and north. And there's a number of reasons why I thought I'd talk about this map. Tom asked me to do it the other day, so I put this together rather quickly. This is referred to as the Vischer map. It's a map of essentially New Amsterdam and New Belgium. It's called Nova Belgique, Nove Anglais. I can't pronounce it in the language, but essentially it's a map that was published in 1655, and really for about 100 years became probably the one of the most popular maps of the Americas. It's highly accurate. I think it has all of the place names and all the Indian tribes known in 1650. So in that regard, it has a lot of detail and was used on many different occasions. So it became something of a bestseller. The map was initially issued in 5 states by Vischer. The first state of the map is only known in 3 copies, so it's really unobtainable. The map I have, this is not my copy, is a second state, which is, I think, reasonably rare, and it's the first map really where you can have a picture, if you will, or rendering of New Amsterdam, the city which preceded what is today modern day New York. So I'll give you a couple of fast facts about it. If you can zoom in, Tom, into Manhattan a little bit. So this is the first map to accurately depict the shape of the island of Manhattan in its oblong state. There are earlier maps that show the island of New York or island of Manhattan, but they aren't really accurate. The geography is not accurate. So that's one of the unique things, the first shape of New York this way. If you blow back a little bit, Tom, you can kind of sort of follow up back a little more. You follow up the Hudson River there to the left of Manhattan, up to what you see they call the top Fort Orange, which is currently Albany, New York. That was a big settlement and a fort that the Dutch had. What's also very interesting is, hey Tom, you may want to flip over to the other map, would you? Because it's got better topography. And so you can see Fort Orange up there. That's essentially Albany, New York, and along the Hudson. And for me, what's really interesting, having lived in New York on various occasions, and I've lived in New York, Connecticut, Manhattan, just to see the place names and their origin in Dutch is really interesting. So if you roll down a bit, go down the Hudson River a bit, Tom, closer to Manhattan, and you see things like they call it the Tappan Sea, which Tappan's there. And if you travel in New York, there used to be the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is now the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge. So I really love seeing the old place names and seeing them today. I live in Westchester County in Bronxville, and this Sewanee was a tribe of Indians. I live right by Sewanee Country Club, so it's kind of interesting to kind of realize that back in the mid 1600s, all these names are maintained. Come down here a little more, and so the map actually, in terms of its accuracy, you can zoom out a little bit, Tom, sorry, get a little more view of the full thing. The map was used in a number of occasions for boundary disputes. It was used by William Penn in a dispute over Maryland and and Pennsylvania to determine the boundaries between the 2 states, the territories at the time. And so in that regard, it has it sort of it had a long life and was very productive. It's also a very beautiful map, and different states of it, the coloring is quite different. But if you look, I love the little animals. The Dutch were just crazy for for beavers. Beavers have mystical powers. You may see some of the Herman Mole maps of beavers walking around on 2 legs carrying carrying stuff, but it's pretty funny to look at the little animals. I think they're cute. So I think it's sort of a charming map in that respect. It has a lot of, a lot of decorative elements to it. Let's take a look in a minute, Tom, at the cartouche. I'll talk a little bit about this. What's also interesting about this map is, the sort of the time at the time, New Amsterdam was occupied by Dutch, and they're really the view here of New Amsterdam from Governor's Island. It presents New York. It looks a reasonably nice little city or settlement, but in actual fact, it was really in bad shape. The fort was really in disrepair. The crane wasn't working. There were no public schools. Sewers were horrible. They were constantly attacked by Indians. It was really in bad shape. And what happened was, some residents of New Amsterdam essentially got together and formed. There's the guy hanging there on the pillory is interesting. And in fact, that's sort of controversial because there's no records of them actually doing, executions or hangings that way, but they just dropped it into the photo. And this is actually the first obtainable view of New York you can get. But what happened was a gentleman, a lawyer, Adrian van der Donk, kind of organized, and they kind of put together essentially a protest that they wanted to send to The Hague back in the Netherlands to just say, hey, look, this place is not working well. The government's not doing their job. Incompetent directors were being attacked by Indians. No education, and really that became kind of the that's carried forward today in what we know as sort of our First Amendment rights, right to redress grievances with the government. So very important kind of attitude that continues to live on and lives on today in the spirit of the New Yorkers. This map you can see is a later state because it has New York actually on it in English, whereas the original maps only have New Amsterdam. Hey Tom, go back to the cartouche again, please. And another element that's interesting, so you see the sizing of like Nova Belgi is bigger than the rest of the lettering. That's a little bit of persuasive cartography because they wanted to kind of really depict the Dutch importance relative to the English occupation of the colonies, and then so that was sort of an attempt to kind of claim a little more, so a little more importance than actually probably was the case at this time. Peter Stuyvesant had negotiated with the English to divide the colonies up a bit. But really, it wasn't. It was probably more equal at this time. Come on, some more. We talked about the view.
How about Philadelphia?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this version here has. Can you zoom in on Philadelphia? So like a lot of maps, this state is probably a third state. It has Philadelphia depicted. Earlier maps were actually pre-Philadelphia, and you can see the Schuylkill there, Schuylkill. If you've been in Philadelphia, if you travel through there's the Schuylkill Expressway. But this is interesting. The version I have does not have Philadelphia. It predates the founding of Philadelphia. So certainly, like with many maps, they've, as they iterate over the place names, they'll add content to the map. So, yeah. And I don't think I have a lot more to discuss. I just think it's a really beautiful map. It's important, I think, for the story around the founding of New York City by the Dutch, and then subsequently taken over by the British.
There's been a book written about this, right?
Yeah, there's a book. It's called "The Island at the Center of the World," written by Russell Shorto. He's written a number of books. So if I encourage you to take a look at it if you have interest in New England or New York history. And it really tells a fascinating story about really how the area was settled and the characters involved. And, you see their names all over the place in the Northeast, whether you're up in,
What's the timing, Steve, from when the Dutch sort of settled initially and then to when the British, the American, how did that?
Yeah, 1625, I think, is the initial settlement of Manhattan. That's the date that's on the seal of the city of New York. And then, variously through 1650s, 1670s, I think, then it became more English, in those times. Stuyvesant had a treaty with the British And it's unclear. I don't have the exact date when they actually took over New York, but in that area, 1625 to 1650 would have been kind of the Dutch rule of Manhattan. And then years following that, it began to kind of bleed off a bit. At this time, the British really had New Haven as their Hartford and New Haven were big British strongholds up in Connecticut. You can also see here, this is this river here coming into the Long Island Sound. You scoot back a little bit. So that's called you can see that's the Connecticut River. If you scoot up, it's called the Versche River, which is fresh river in Dutch. So we had a speaker come to that. Went up with the Connecticut Max Society, and a professor from Wesleyan came. He's a scholar on Adrian Block. You can see Adrian Block's island here off the tip of Montauk. So Block was a big explorer of the Long Island Sound and the rivers and
Block Island.
Yeah. If you go to the right a bit, you see Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. So anyway, so for those of us in the Northeast, this is a kind of interesting map to play with because all the places. We're opening a campus out in Long Island this weekend in East Hampton. You can see the Hamptons there. I was in Montauk a couple of weeks ago. So there you go.
It's interesting. My wife's from Rhode Island, and I noticed in passing that where Newport is now, it's listed as Rhode Island. It's kind of, the name goes way back.
Yeah, and there's Fisher's Island. Interesting.
Just to the left of Manhattan, there's a town called Pavoni. One of my ancestors, Adrian Powell, was a founder or in the startup of the West Indies Dutch company, and he managed to start the first settlement to the west of the Hudson River, and that was done at Pavonia.
Okay.
And which is a Latin version of the Dutch name Pauw. Pauw actually means peacock in Dutch.
Okay,
and,
great.
I think that's also from the 1620s. He was required to attract at least 50 families there by the rules of the West India Company and didn't manage to do that. So about 10 years later, in the 30s or 40s, he sold it back to the company, and of course, the whole area changed anyway.
To me, what's interesting is when I decided I was going to do this map yesterday, I think, with and you start looking and thinking about it. Every time I look at a map and start thinking about it, this opens up new pathways of research and history that I kind of want to go back and read about. So I appreciate that, and I have a book I haven't read yet about the whole, about the Dutch Indies companies, the various East and West Indies companies. I want to read that. So,
yeah, I think they're the ones that originally paid $24 for Manhattan.
Yeah.
There's that sort of famous apocryphal story that occurs in, I think.
Yeah, Peter Minuet bought it from the Indian.
And I think it illustrates the difference between the way the Dutch did the business, which was to try and trade with the people, rather than the British, which was to conquer the people.
No, that's a very important point, because the Dutch were at heart traders and commercial people, right? And the British were they were colonizing and trying to essentially expand their empire.
Imperialists.
Yeah.
Another ancestor.
Another thing, I can't remember which way it went, but this professor from Wesleyan, interesting guy. He's a scholar on Adrian Block, and his wife is a marine biologist, and he's gone back to study the impact of all of the beaver. They kind of decimated the beaver population for a while, and the lack of beavers caused the damming of the river to be diminished, which meant that more water flowed in, and the silt was different. So his wife is measuring the silt in the sound, and they can map that back to changes in temperature due to the changing population of beavers in the day. So it's just really kind of freaky to think about that. But this big river, the Versche River, is the fresh river. That's the river they were studying. So, and that's funny.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you for joining us from the East Coast, and also preparing a map on a short notice. And good questions, everyone. I see the other comments in the chat.